2 words. Case dismissed. And just like that, justice took its lunch break. No gavel slam, no dramatic pause, just Mike Halstead leaned back in his chair with a lazy stretch and a smirk spreading across his face. In the back, fluorescent lights hummed like they knew what was coming, but the real noise came from the soundless smugness of 2 men who'd done this before. Mike Halstead and Rick Donnelly. Rick clapped. Once, twice, then stopped. Quiet, controlled, just enough to leave an echo behind the judge's fading voice. He didn't need volume. The rhythm said everything. We win again. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. They stood without urgency, collecting their belongings as if the courtroom belonged to them. There was no glance toward the plaintiff, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of the man they had dragged through weeks of testimony. To them, it was over. It always ended this way. The system had made its decision, not based on truth but comfort, not on evidence but habit. And that habit had long since learned to favor men like Mike and Rick. Behind them, in the plaintiff's seat, Andre Collins didn't move. His hands remained folded, his back straight, his expression unreadable. There was no outburst, no protest, no sign of disbelief, just silence. The kind of silence that fills a space long after the words are gone. He kept his eyes forward, fixed on the bench that had just closed its eyes to everything he had tried to show. He didn't blink. He didn't shift. He just stayed, like something unfinished. Mike leaned close to Rick as they passed by. He really thought he could take us down, he muttered. Rick shook his head once. Should have known better. The words were low but not hidden. They wanted him to hear. And Andre did. But still, he didn't turn. He didn't respond. The court officers started moving people out. Reporters packed up their gear. The headline had already written itself. Officers cleared of misconduct in high-profile use-of-force case. Outside, the news vans were parked curbside, microphones ready for reaction. They didn't wait for Andre. Their focus was elsewhere, on the defense, on the usual sound bites, on the system continuing its cycle. Andre walked through the crowd unnoticed, like a man walking through smoke. He didn't stop, he didn't speak. Not because he didn't have anything to say, but because today wasn't about what was spoken. It was about what was remembered. Mike and Rick headed toward their car, light in their steps. Another win, another headline erased, another man silenced. They believed the day had ended in their favor, and in a way it had, but not in the way they thought. Andre hadn't come into that courtroom to win a verdict. He knew the odds. He had read the reports, seen the patterns, understood the politics. What he came for was the record, the truth placed into the transcript, word for anyone who would dare look beyond the ruling. This case wasn't about victory. It was about visibility, about forcing into the open what so many had quietly buried. Andre had worked too long in silence to pretend he still believed in clean wins. Before the courtroom, before the law books, before the gray suit and the quiet composure, he wore a badge. He served in a department that taught him how quickly loyalty was measured, and how justice had different thresholds depending on the uniform, the skin, the silence. He had been on the other side of the flashing lights. He had tasted concrete and blood and learned that truth without power was nothing but a whisper in a crowded room. And yet, even then, he didn't quit. Not right away. He tried to fix it from the inside. Believed in reform before he believed in strategy. It was the kind of faith they stripped from you, not all at once, but piece by piece. Andre's calm in that courtroom wasn't resignation. It was calculation. His silence wasn't defeat, it was preparation. What do you do when the system fails you in full view of the public? When justice walks out before the cameras arrive? You study it. You record it, you trace its outlines, and then you wait. Because men are most powerful when they say nothing. And some verdicts don't end the story, they begin it. Andre Collins wasn't finished. He was just walking out of Chapter 1. Before he ever wore a suit, he wore a badge and a target. Andre Collins didn't come from a family of lawyers. He didn't grow up reciting court decisions or watching Senate hearings. He came from the streets just outside Baton Rouge, where justice wasn't an ideal. It was a gamble. But he believed in the badge. He believed that if you wore it right, if you treated it with the same reverence others treated pulpits and flags, it could mean something. He believed you could walk into the broken rooms and bring light. That if you worked twice as hard, kept your reports clean, showed up early, stayed late, and held your tongue when it mattered most, you could change the system from inside. That belief was still alive on the night everything changed. It was raining. Not hard, just enough to smear the edges of the world outside the windshield. Andre had just finished a 12-hour shift, uniform off, service weapon locked in the trunk, off duty but alert because you never really clock out when you wear a badge. He was driving an old blue Honda Civic that rattled like a cough with wheels. A car he'd bought used and paid off in cash over 3 years. It wasn't much, but it ran. He'd stop for gas and a bottled water, maybe a microwave burrito. Just a few quiet minutes before heading home to sleep off the shift. But as he pulled out of the parking lot, the rear view lit up with red and blue. No sirens, just lights. 2 squad cars. He didn't panic. He rolled to a stop, hands on the wheel, engine off. Standard protocol. Until he saw who stepped out. Mike Holstead and Rick Donnelly. They weren't from his precinct, but he recognized them. A training seminar 6 months earlier. Bad energy then, worse now. No greetings, no explanation, no reason, just flashlights and a stare like a dare. Step out of the vehicle. Andre stayed calm. I'm law enforcement, off duty. Badge is in the glove box. Mike didn't blink. Did I ask you to speak? Andre kept his hands visible. I'm reaching for my ID, that's all. But he never got the chance. The door was yanked open before he could even unbuckle. Rick grabbed his collar. Mike hit first. It wasn't a fight. It was a message. A correction. Each punch wasn't just to his ribs. It was to the idea of justice itself. The blows came fast, practiced. A knee to the back, a fist to the side, elbows, boots. He yelled his badge number, loud, clear, over and over like it was a spell that might stop the beating. It didn't. Someone jammed a knee into his neck. He couldn't tell who. His vision blurred, rain mixed with oil on the pavement. Someone laughed. The laugh stung more than the fists. Somewhere in the background, a voice crackled through the radio. Confirm ID. Officer Andre Collins. That was when it stopped. That was when they stepped back, breathing heavy, gloves slick with water and something darker. They checked his ID after they erased his dignity. No apology. No explanation. Just a muttered threat and the sound of boots walking away. You didn't see anything, neither did we. He lay there for several minutes, jaw bleeding, ribs aching, head spinning. The asphalt was cold, the sky darker now. The lights of the gas station still flickered like nothing had happened. He sat up slowly, careful not to pass out. When he stood, he didn't roar, he didn't chase after them. He got in his car and drove home with the windows cracked, letting the rain rinse the taste of blood off his lips. He didn't go to the ER, didn't call his supervisor, didn't file a report. What would he say? That he'd been beaten by fellow officers who wore the same badge? Swore the same oath? The system already made it clear what it did with men who said too much. He took painkillers, slept on the floor that night because the bed felt too soft for broken bones. When he looked in the mirror the next morning, his eyes were swollen, his lips split, and his silence louder than ever. He bled into silence, and silence bled into resignation. 6 months later, he turned in his resignation letter. It was typed neatly. No emotion, no story, just a decision. His last day, no one asked why. They didn't have to. He left without ceremony, just a nod to the front desk and a final glance at the precinct walls. That was the end of his time in uniform, but not the end of his purpose, because somewhere between bruised ribs and sleepless nights, something hardened, not hate, not vengeance, something more dangerous than both. He didn't swear revenge. He enrolled in law school, night classes, public libraries, coffee at midnight, case briefs by sunrise. While Mike and Rick polished their boots, Andre polished his briefs. He read everything: statutes, case law, dissenting opinions. He learned how language could be weaponized, how silence could be broken by properly placed facts. He learned how to fight in rooms where fists didn't matter, only precision. He didn't tell many people, just moved quietly, registered for the bar, passed it, then applied to a civil rights firm in the city with a focus on excessive force and internal misconduct. They gave him a desk the size of a coffee table and a stack of ignored cases that other lawyers didn't want to touch. That's where it started, the rebuild, not with fire, but with paper, not with shouts, but with statements. He remembered what it felt like to be left on the pavement, nameless and unheard. So now he made sure no one got left that way again. Not if he could help it. He wasn't after payback. He was after proof. And for that, you don't need fury. You need evidence. And time. And a long memory. That was the difference. Mike and Rick used time to bury things. Andre used it to dig them up. Andre Collins didn't open a law office with a brass nameplate or a ribbon cutting. He took a desk at a firm most attorneys avoided, tucked in the far corner, near a radiator that clanked in winter and a window that stuck in summer. It wasn't prestige he wanted, it was access. The civil rights cases he picked up weren't the ones that made headlines. They were the ones nobody else wanted to file, the ones filled with half-lost documents, shaky witnesses, and victims whose credibility was always questioned before their pain was ever acknowledged. He didn't chase headlines. He built footnotes that would outlive news cycles. Most people didn't notice the pattern. A complaint from a mother whose son was bruised during a routine stop. A gas station clerk who claimed the surveillance footage mysteriously disappeared after reporting a violent arrest. An undocumented street vendor whose cart was tipped over and property confiscated. Andre took them all. Not because he expected every case to end in victory, but because every file was a breadcrumb, each deposition a trail. He was mapping something larger than a single win. These cases weren't just clients, they were coordinates. The names involved started to repeat. The beats of abuse echoed across boroughs. And behind several of them, the same officers kept surfacing. He lost more cases than he won. Judges tossed out evidence, juries leaned toward uniforms. But Andre didn't flinch. Because what if losing was never the failure? What if it was bait? What if the courtroom, with all its rules and its reluctance, was just a stage, and all Andre needed was the script? Every trial gave him access, every motion opened a door, and what he couldn't say aloud, he filed in silence. He collected transcripts, matched depositions to body cam gaps, noted patterns in report language. Redactions only made him look closer. Every dismissal was archived, every objection sustained against him was noted, not for the appeal, but for the profile he was building. Because sometimes power doesn't roar, it listens. And while the defense celebrated each victory, Andre was pulling thread after thread from a very old fabric. The day the Collins v. Holstead and Donnelly case was thrown out, Andre didn't hang his head. He left the courtroom with a copy of the final transcript and 3 signatures that would matter later. Not for the press, not for public opinion, but for the quiet rooms where real pressure builds. What Mike and Rick didn't know was that someone else was watching too. Not a journalist, not a blogger, but a deputy from the mayor's office who'd been sitting 3 rows back, notepad in hand, saying nothing but writing plenty. The city had been uneasy for a while. There were whispers behind closed doors, lawsuits quietly stacking up, reports of internal complaints that didn't match what was written in official logs. The mayor's office wasn't watching the case. They were watching Andre. Not because he was loud, but because he was consistent. Not because he shook the room, but because he showed up again and again, each time better prepared, each time more precise. They didn't need a hero, they needed a witness who spoke in evidence. The city was a wound. Andre was stitching it with paperwork. No podiums, no marches, just files, names, dates, patterns. He wasn't trying to make anyone look bad. He was showing them what was already there, hidden in plain sight. What they chose not to act on before now stared at them from a wall of case files that all bore his initials. People higher up began to notice, not just Andre, but the volume of his silence, the thoroughness, the fact that in every report that touched the edges of misconduct, his name circled back. It started with questions, then a phone call, then a coffee with a deputy city attorney who asked, off the record, "What are you really trying to do?" Andre didn't flinch. "I'm trying to finish something." That was when the wind shifted. A week later, 2 internal memos circulated through departments without official headers. They asked about evidence chains, about complaint logs, about officers with repeat allegations. Someone in Internal Affairs opened a review purely for due diligence, but the language was careful, quiet. No one was ready to name names yet. Then came the anonymous tip line reactivation. A clerk mentioned hearing the mayor's chief of staff refer to "that Collins lawyer" in a closed-door meeting. A captain with 20 years quietly passed Andre a file that fell off a desk. It wasn't a tidal wave, but something was moving. The pressure had shifted, and those who used to smirk in courtrooms were beginning to double-check the locks on their doors. Because silence had changed direction, now it whispered in hallways, leaked through emails, sat like a cold draft in precincts that used to run warm on power. Andre didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He kept filing motions. He kept logging names. Because it wasn't time yet. But it was coming. And the louder the denials got, the clearer it became. They were no longer certain he'd lost. They were starting to wonder if maybe they'd just walked into a setup. The break room was thick with laughter, the kind that sticks to the ceiling and settles into the walls. Mike Holstead sat in his usual spot, feet up, leaning back like the chair owed him comfort. A half-eaten sandwich rested beside his badge, and his mouth was mid-sentence in a story about some rookie who couldn't tell a traffic stop from a taco run. Rick Donnelly was already laughing, nodding along, the sound bouncing off the vending machine like it had been rehearsed. They laughed like they paid rent in that room, like the place belonged to them, and maybe, for a long time, it did. But lately, the room didn't echo quite the same. The newer officers still showed up, still poured their burnt coffee, still nodded at the jokes, but they didn't laugh with the same ease. They glanced at the clock more often. Their smiles tightened faster. One of them, a younger guy named Sanchez, excused himself mid-lunch and never came back. Another, Officer Patel, listened without comment, eyes on his phone, fingers tapping messages that didn't reach the conversation. It wasn't mutiny. Not yet. But the room had changed its rhythm. The authority in it no longer sounded like a roar. It sounded like noise waiting to be interrupted. The day the precinct got the memo about the leadership transition, Mike barely looked up. Another shuffle, another suit trying to push policy. He didn't care. They never lasted. They came in with clipboards and concern and left with ulcers. So when briefing was announced for 800 sharp with a new commanding officer from Baton Rouge Internal Affairs, Mike and Rick arrived like they always did, loud, early, confident. The briefing room was quiet. No projector, no slideshow, no agenda on the board, just a nameplate on the front podium, Commander A. Collins. Mike squinted. "You don't think..." But he didn't finish the sentence. The door opened. Silence followed. Andre Collins stepped inside, wearing a Navy uniform so crisp it could cut through tension. Polished shoes, gold trim, clean lines, every step purposeful. He walked to the podium without a glance to either side. The officers in the room stood a little straighter. Some shifted in their seats. One dropped a pen. It hit the floor like a warning bell. Rick stared at him, mouth slightly open, disbelief settling into his face like dust on untouched shelves. Mike's expression didn't move. but his foot slowly dropped to the floor. It was like watching your ghost run the meeting. The same man they left bleeding behind a gas station, the same man they laughed about in a courtroom hallway, now stood at the front of the room, and he wasn't carrying a grudge. He was carrying orders. Andre waited until the room settled. Then he opened the folder on the podium and looked up. "Good morning. I'm Commander Andre Collins. Effective immediately, I'll be overseeing all internal affairs activity within this precinct." His tone didn't rise, his expression didn't waver. "Some of you know who I am, some of you only think you do. Either way, the only thing that matters now is this. This department will operate under integrity, or it won't operate at all." He let that hang, no sound, not even a cough, just the weight of his words stretching through the room. "I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to clean house." A pause. He scanned the room slowly, never settling on Mike or Rick. "Ever seen a lion walk into a butcher shop?" Another pause. "That's today. I won't be asking who cut the meat wrong. I'll be counting the bones." He closed the folder softly. The sound was gentle, the message was not. He didn't call anyone out, he didn't look anyone in the eye for too long, especially not Mike, especially not Rick. He didn't have to. His presence did the work. He stepped down from the podium and walked past the rows like a conductor inspecting an orchestra. And like musicians caught out of tune, the older officers adjusted themselves, subtly. The younger ones sat up straighter. The silence wasn't just heavy, it was calibrated. He was the conductor. They were out-of-tune flutes trying not to be noticed. That was how it began. Psychological warfare, not with threats, not with warnings, but with absence. Andre didn't speak to Mike and Rick, didn't assign them directly, didn't acknowledge their jokes in the hallway. He handed them orders through lieutenants. He reviewed their paperwork with a red pen, but left no notes. He passed by them without a glance. To everyone else, he was measured, fair, exacting. To them, he was invisible, and that, more than yelling, more than confrontation, made their skin itch. Mike started making louder comments in the locker room. "Guess we're running a daycare now." Rick added sarcasm to every report he filed, but no one laughed. The tone had shifted, and they knew it. They used to walk through the precinct like they owned the walls. Now those walls watched back. Andre didn't celebrate the shift. He just kept walking, kept signing, kept recording. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the pressure system had moved. The temperature was dropping and everyone could feel it. Especially the two men who used to command the room. Now they sat at the edge of it, still loud, still present, but no longer in control. Because when the man you beat down walks back in with rank on his collar and silence on his side, you don't brace for thunder. You brace for consequences. Andre stayed late, long after the lights dimmed and the chatter died. Most nights the precinct emptied out by 10. By midnight only the janitor made rounds, but in the far office, behind a desk covered in folders and coffee-stained Post-its, Andre was still moving. He didn't rush. He didn't speak much. He read, redacted, highlighted. He pulled threads from incident reports like he was unraveling a sweater that someone had hidden too long in the back of a closet. Nothing flashy, no declarations, just patterns, small inconsistencies, missing timestamps, repetitive language. Every detail was another stitch in the net. He requested body cam footage and compared it to dispatch logs. He flagged witness statements that didn't line up. He made a list of names that kept showing up in reports that ended without consequences. Some cases stretched back a decade, others were only months old. A system full of secrets leaks when someone actually gives a damn. And Andre gave enough to stay until his eyes blurred. He didn't have to hunt, he just had to notice. The silence of paperwork speaks volumes when you listen close enough. By the end of the second month, the file on Mike Holstead and Rick Donnelly had tripled in size. The first officer to come forward was Caleb Morris. Fresh out of academy when he first heard the rumors, now 2 years in, he'd seen enough to stop pretending. Andre called him into a quiet room. No windows, one fan humming, fluorescent bulb flickering like it wasn't sure it wanted to be part of the conversation. Caleb sat stiff, hands clasped so tight his knuckles turned pale. His voice shook like it was carrying 10 years of silence instead of just 2. "I've seen things, Commander," he said. "Not hearsay, I've seen it. I watched them rough up a kid for nothing, slammed him against a cruiser so hard I thought the glass would crack, then laughed about it like it was a prank." Andre didn't interrupt. He didn't nod or offer comfort. He just listened, every word recorded, every detail documented. "They don't even file half the time," Caleb added. "It's like it never happened, but I know it did." When they finished, Andre didn't say thank you. He didn't promise protection. He simply closed the folder and said, "You did the right thing. Now let me do mine." Caleb left the room looking like a man who had just confessed to something heavier than guilt. The next morning, Andre entered the briefing room with a folder under his arm. Officers shifted in their chairs. Some still didn't know what to make of him. Too calm, too deliberate. Mike and Rick were already seated in their usual spots. They looked up, said nothing, just watched. Andre placed a small stack of documents on the front desk and began handing them out. Line by line, name by name, page. Everyone received a packet, everyone read the cover sheet. Request for disciplinary review, Officers M. Holstead and R. Donnelly. 12 pages. Detailed, cross-referenced. Witness accounts, procedural violations, camera discrepancies, everything signed, verified, compiled. Mike squinted at the first page like it was a joke with bad handwriting. Rick flipped to the back, then stood. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice rising, face flushed. Andre stood still. His tone didn't waver. "It's a process you should have learned in training. Sit down, Officer Holstead." Mike's jaw tightened. "You coming after us now? This some kind of personal vendetta?" Andre didn't blink. "If it were personal, I'd be pressing charges. This is professional." Rick let out a sharp laugh. "You trying to ruin us? You did that yourselves," Andre replied. "I'm just bringing it into the light." The room held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. A shift had occurred, one that couldn't be walked back. Andre turned, collected his papers, and walked out without waiting for approval or applause. The silence behind him wasn't respect, it was reckoning. Word spread fast. It always does when power shifts. Hallways that once echoed with casual laughter now held whispers behind closed doors. Officers who used to nod with pride now nodded with caution. Rumors became questions. Questions turned into quiet conversations in cars and locker rooms. No one wanted to be next. Some denied it, some defended Mike and Rick, but most stayed quiet. Fear is a fast rumor, and Andre just lit the fuse. The next week, a department-wide bulletin landed in every inbox. 2 names at the top. Effective immediately, Officers Holstead and Donnelly were placed on administrative suspension pending investigation. The language was clinical, but the meaning wasn't. Mike sat in his driveway that night, engine off, staring at the paper like it might erase itself. His wife didn't speak. His teenage son stayed upstairs. Rick, on the other hand, made it to a dive bar by 8, and by 10 he was telling anyone who'd listen how he was being framed by some rookie with a grudge. But even he knew this wasn't about one complaint. This was years catching up. Andre didn't call a press conference. He didn't leak it to the media. He just kept going. There were more files to open, more silence to break. He knew it wasn't over. But it had begun, and that was enough for now. The room wasn't built for spectacle. It was plain. Fluorescent lights overhead, chairs set in neat rows, a podium surrounded by a half-circle of stone-faced board members. No judge, no jury, just a civilian review board, a few press representatives, and a city that had grown tired of whispers. This wasn't a trial, it was something heavier. A reckoning. And when Andre Collins stepped to the microphone in his tailored navy suit, he didn't bring anger with him. He brought documentation, steady hands, a voice tempered by time and repetition. He didn't open with emotion. He opened with evidence. policy violations, timeline discrepancies, reports that contradicted footage, redacted statements reconnected with unaltered records. Line by line, he laid it out, clinical, clean, undeniable. And when he finally paused, he looked up from his papers, gaze level, voice firm. "I used to wear the same badge as these men," he said, without needing to name them. "I believed in what it stood for, but a badge doesn't protect character, it only reflects it. These men hid behind it, and when I tried to hold them accountable, they made sure I paid for it." In the back row, Mike Holstead sat rigid in a suit too stiff for comfort. Rick Donnelly beside him, face tight, eyes unmoving. There were no interruptions, no objections. Just silence, broken only by the scratch of a pen and the quiet click of a camera shutter. This time, there was no courtroom safety net, no judge who looked away, no system to bend the truth. The truth, at last, stood up. What followed didn't make front-page news. It wasn't meant to. But behind the scenes, the consequences stacked fast. The board's recommendation arrived less than a week later. Termination of both officers, permanent decertification, referral to the state attorney's office for potential prosecution. Internal Affairs launched a full audit of cases linked to their service records. The department braced for a ripple effect, and across the city, stations quietly reviewed complaint files that had gathered dust for years. They built careers on silence. Now silence wouldn't protect them. There was no parade of justice, no viral moment, but behind closed doors, policies shifted, training modules changed, a memo was sent department-wide warning against unreported force incidents. Small steps, maybe, but steps all the same, and in the precinct where Mike and Rick once walked like kings, new recruits whispered less and listened more. No one joked about what had happened. They didn't have to. Everyone had seen what accountability looked like when it finally showed up. Andre didn't celebrate. He returned to his desk. 2 files still waiting, cases still open. And then, one evening, after a long day of depositions and committee briefings, he walked into the old courthouse alone, not for a trial, not for a hearing, just to sit. The benches were empty, the lights lower than he remembered, but the space hadn't changed. Same marble floor, same ceiling fan that turned with slow reluctance. He walked to the same seat he once occupied on the worst day of his life. Sat down, let the silence settle. The benches remembered, the lights dimmed in respect. There was no audience, no verdict being read, just the steady beat of a man revisiting the place that once tried to erase him. He rested a hand on the wood railing, closed his eyes, took one long breath. No ghosts spoke, no weight lifted, but something shifted. He wasn't that man anymore, the one who walked out of here thinking justice had turned its back. Now the system was looking directly at him, and it was listening. Footsteps echoed behind him. Officer Caleb Morris stepped through the door, hesitant, hands in his pockets. His voice was soft. "You still working late?" Andre opened his eyes. "Always." Caleb stepped closer. "I just wanted to say thank you. I don't think I could have spoken up if you weren't here." Andre studied him. Young, honest, uncertain. The kind of officer he once was. The kind he hoped the city still had a future for. "That's how it starts," Andre said. "One voice becomes 2. 2 becomes 20. Caleb hesitated. "You ever regret it? Coming back, taking this role?" Andre exhaled slowly. "Every day. But I regret staying silent more." They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, just breathing in the quiet that, for once, didn't feel heavy. Then Andre stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at the room one last time. Justice doesn't yell, it knocks. And then it walks in, not to announce itself, but to get to work. And Andre Collins had just begun. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next part.